What's going on? This is Nick Minio with Excel Mortgage. I'm a licensed loan officer here in California. I wanted to make this video that I think is very useful for all the buyers out there who are sitting on the sidelines because they don't know what to do in this higher interest rate environment. This information is going to apply to what's happening in the real estate market right now, and it presents an opportunity for buyers out there. So higher interest rates. When people hear higher interest rates, they usually think negatively. But for right now, there's a small window of opportunity where I think these higher interest rates can actually be your friend as a buyer. So let's get into this presentation and look at some of the data and explain why I think this is a great time for buyers to get a good deal on a property right now in March 2023. So let's start out with what drives mortgage rates. Now, inflation is the main driver of mortgage rates, and as you can see here on this chart, inflation is on its way down, and when inflation goes down, mortgage rates will follow. This certainly isn't in a straight line, as you can see, and inflation maybe hasn't come down as quickly as we would have liked, but eventually inflation will continue to move lower, and that will move mortgage rates to more attractive levels. Now, what is the holdup with inflation getting back down to its normal levels? It's shelter costs because they lag. Let's take a look at what's happening with shelter costs right now, which is measured by rents and owner's equivalent rents. These are the predominant drivers in the shelter component. Now, as you can see here on this chart, the cost of rents and owner's equivalent has gone up dramatically, but after peaking in early 2022, they've eased up significantly, and now the year-over-year rate is 3%. The problem with this is that when you look at the way that it's measured, it counts the last 12 months, and what's even worse than that is that although you may have to go back 10, 11, or 12 months, when the survey occurred around here, it's quite possible that they may have signed their lease before that around here. So this might be where they're paying rent effectively, but it may be reflective of where they signed the lease around this time. So you really have a long lag period here. It could be a year and a half in lag for this to catch up. So while we know in real time the cost of shelter is easing, but the way that it's reported in the CPI, especially the core CPI, which is going to drive the direction of mortgage rates, we know that there is a lag. So you could think of this lag in shelter costs as a roller coaster. So the front of the roller coaster, when it hits the apex, could be heading lower, but the back of that same roller coaster is pointing upwards. So that's kind of like how the real shelter costs are behaving versus where shelter costs are being reported in the CPI. So this next slide right here demonstrates how shelter costs are reported in the CPI. And as you can see here with this blue line, this is how it's reflected in the CPI. It's still reflecting a lot of pressure for shelter costs that is artificially pushing our CPI higher. So you could actually do a calculation on this. The shelter component, which makes up for 43% of the core CPI. So this is a very big weighting on CPI. And the difference here can be calculated if you look at the 7.9% of how it's being reported versus the real-time shelter cost of 3%. This is a difference of 4.9%. So when you take that into consideration and the weighting of 43%, you can see here this actually equals 2%. So this lag in shelter costs is actually pushing CPI up by about 2% higher than it should be. So if CPI right now is around 5.5% on the core CPI, it really is around 3.5% if we were taking a real-time read on shelter costs. So the point here is that eventually this all does catch up, and eventually we will see CPI core move lower, and that should help mortgage rates move to a significantly lower level. Now, once the shelter costs catch up from the lag and our core CPI is lower, this is going to drive mortgage rates lower. What will that do to the housing market? So this chart right here illustrates existing home inventory in the marketplace, and as you can see here, it is very tight. A lot of people like to talk about bubble conditions, but if you take a look at the last housing bubble in 2007, certainly this was a problem because there were just too many homes and not enough buyers. So when you take a look at the amount of homes available in 2007, there were 4 million homes in inventory for sale. Today, there is less than 1 million units listed for sale. Now, at the same time, our population has grown, so we are in a very tight inventory environment. And the bottom line here is that if rates do drop and you see an increase in buyer activity, they are going to be looking at extremely tight inventory, and that spells multiple offers and upside pricing pressure. Here's the real story of existing homes in inventory. If we look at the 980,000 homes available that are currently being reported, what it's not showing is about 40% of these homes are currently under contract. So they're off the market and you can't really buy those. When you take a look at the actual active listings available that you can pick and choose from, it's 578,000. So if you take all this into consideration, our population is growing. It's nearly 340 million people. And yet active listings available for purchasing is only 578,000. Now that's very slim pickings. So if activity is increased through lower mortgage rates, and that will happen once inflation comes down, there's going to be a lot of upside pressure in pricing. Let's take a look at this from a comparative point of view. So this chart shows what active listings look like right now in February of 2023, and this area right here represents a more normal marketplace. Home values have gone up during this time, but they really appreciated in value when there was low inventory. Here we are again right here in February of 2023 with low inventory, and now we don't expect to get the 3% mortgage rates that we saw in 2020 and 2021. But if we see mortgage rates somewhere down in that 5% range, we could see demand crank up quite a bit in this very low supply environment. So look, we've seen home values increase for over 10 years consecutively. 121 months straight, home values have moved up. But in the second half of 2022, home values have come down modestly, and it depends on the measurement you look at. If you look at FHFA, they've come down 1%. If you look at Case-Shiller Home Price Index, it's 2.7%. But on a year-over-year basis, home values are still going up. Now, if rates do reach a level where they start coming down, well, then home values will not be coming down any longer. They're going to start coming up. So there will be a bottom coming up. And let's assume none of us have the crystal ball and can predict exactly when that will happen. So what do most people do? They wait when the bottom occurs, then they wait until prices start going back up to feel that it's safe to jump back into the market. The problem with that is that the sellers now are more confident, and now there's more competition. There's multiple offers on properties, so now you're not going to get as good of a deal as you can now. The trick is to see the future before it becomes obvious. So if we realize that mortgage rates will drive demand in a very tight supply environment like we have now, and when inflation comes down, mortgage rates will, what you want to do is take advantage of this time when there's a little bit of fear and a little bit of weakness in the housing market and enter before it hits the bottom. Because during this time, sellers are a little bit more fearful and there's less competition and they're more willing to give you a discount. Let's take a look at a case study. So if you look at the last time the market bottomed out, you can see that prices started coming down and bottomed out in early 2012 before it started to move higher. But notice the acceleration up. It was much greater once it hit the bottom because once buyers started to enter, it really drove prices higher. In fact, in the next year from the bottom, home prices appreciated 8% from January of 2012 to January 2013, which is pretty robust. But inventory levels at that time we're at 2.4 million. Now, where we are during this market bottom is less than a million in inventory. So there's far fewer homes that are available. Now, do we get a similar amount of gain of the 8% that we saw in 2012? A greater level of gain? It's very difficult to forecast this, but I think it's safe to say that prices will be supportive. With 2.4 million in inventory, we saw an 8% gain. So let's be very conservative and let's say we get a 3% gain now, even with this lower level of inventory. So not even the 8% we saw in 2012, not a greater percentage due to the lower inventory we have, not even 5%. Let's just take a look at the current opportunity if it were a modest 3% gain. All right, so let's take a look at this opportunity right now in real estate. So I'm using round numbers here just to keep it easy, starting with a home value of $500K. Now, if you're in the Bay Area, you're probably not going to get a home for $500K. But if you're in the Sacramento area, you could find a home for $500K. But again, let's just keep this simple and say that it's a starting home value of $500,000. And let's say, for example, you're taking out a $400,000 mortgage. Now, rates have elevated about 1% over the last month. Increase your payment by about $257 a month, which is an increase of just over $3,000 for the year. So this would be the cost of the higher mortgage rate. But right now, since we're in an environment where sellers are maybe a little bit more concerned and willing to negotiate, and there's a lot of negativity in the media, you can probably get a discount. Maybe it's a 2% in a seller credit, maybe even more, maybe a little bit less. But for this scenario, let's say it's 2%, so that's a $10,000 savings right there. This could be used towards a temporary rate buy down. It could be used towards a permanent rate buy down to cover your closing costs. So there's definitely a lot of different ways you can make this discount more valuable. But let's just say that you get a $10,000 discount on the home. Now, as we hit a bottom, it will happen in the very near future. Values are going to start to go up. Remember the last slide that I showed you? The last bottom, home prices went up 8% year over year back in January of 2012. But again, we're going to be completely conservative here and modest, and let's just say it's a 3% appreciation gain once we hit the bottom year over year. So you're going to get that 2% discount. You're getting a 3% a price appreciation, and this totals $25,000. Now, you're paying more due to the higher interest rates now, around $3,000. And let's even add in a cost for a future refinance. So I'm adding in about $2,000 for that. And let's say the cost for the higher rate plus a refi is going to be $5,000. So the total potential benefit for this scenario is $20,000. Now, this seems like a pretty good opportunity in real estate right now. But again, the trick is to see the opportunity, to see the future before it becomes obvious. I hope this video has helped you if you're a buyer who is unsure of what to do in these current market conditions. And I hope this helps all of my realtor partners out there. Feel free to send this over to your buyers. Take advantage of this opportunity when there's a little bit of fear in the market. Now is a great time to strike and get a great deal on a property. At the end of this video, there's going to be a QR code with all of my information. Feel free to scan that and reach out to me if you have any questions. Thank you so much for watching this video, and take care.